So where are all the male muses? Stick around and let's see what the literature says today on this episode of Christian Date Coach. Let's hit it. What's up, everybody? My name is Dr. Phoenix Singh. I want to warmly welcome you to this episode of Christian Date Coach. As always, it's a blessing to have you here with me. Please do feel free to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel if you enjoy the content that we present here. What we're dedicated to is to bring you practical guidance as well as literature-based, so evidence-based insights in terms of attraction, dating, and relationships from a Christian perspective, but really trying to present content that would be relevant to anybody, whether you're a believer or not. You are warmly welcome here. As somebody who was a lifetime atheist myself, found Christ when I was 22 years old. I totally get all sides of it in terms of growing up either without religion or falling away and coming out and coming back rather. It's a big thing. It's a big thing. So it's a blessing to have you here. In any case, let's go ahead and get started here today. Today we're going to be discussing where are all the male muses. Did you ever notice this? A couple years ago, me and the girlfriend were over at the Louvre in Paris, and that was fantastic. And we're walking down to these sorts of things and basically seeing all of these kinds of these sculptures that were, there's no other way to say it, I mean, just absolutely breathtaking. And she and I were having a discussion about the concept of kind of these goddesses as being muses to men. And I started thinking to myself, I just wonder, you never hear women talking about kind of being so incredibly inspired by a man that they just have to sit down and paint something or have to compose a piece of music for a man that they just met on the street. You rarely hear that. I mean, if ever. I've personally never heard it, but I've certainly, had female friends who, a guy will come up to them at a restaurant. This happened years ago, right? And basically you hand them a napkin with a drawing on it and just say, I was so inspired. Just, I saw you, your beauty was so inspiring that I just had to draw you. And this phenomenon is so interesting to me in terms of that dichotomy, right? And I've been thinking about it quite a bit and, looking into it in terms of what the literature says. And so I got 4 kind of points or whatever to be able to present today. So the first one, men and women are very different, right? We're more similar than we are different. There's no doubt about that. But we are by no means identical. Right? Intrinsic value is absolutely equal. There's no question about that. But we're very different, right? And I would say that we're not identical, but rather we're symmetrical, right? And that symmetry is just one of the most beautiful things about our world, in my opinion. So what happens is that there's certain things that, especially when it comes to attraction, and we talk a lot on this channel about attraction in terms of things that are different between, the fundamental needs of a woman for a man to be found attractive and vice versa, right? So one of the things to keep in mind is that women overall have less need to display, quote unquote, good genes, right? To men, for men to be able to find them attractive. Now, what do I mean by good genes? So what I mean is things that essentially, morphologically are not phenotypical. So you may say, what the hell does that mean? Right? So what I'm trying to communicate here is that there are certain things that women have in spades just as much as men do, that men deeply need to portray beyond their initial looks to be able to hit the initial attraction triggers for women. Men need to demonstrate higher value. This is the goal, and we need to do it as quickly as possible if we don't know you and we've just, let's say, approached you in a coffee shop, in a bar, a small group, church, whatever it is. We need to demonstrate higher value, and of course there's different ways to do that. There are ways that we can do it non-verbally, for example, in terms of how it is that we gesticulate, the paralanguage that we use, inflection and intonation. It can be our facial affect, things that can make us more or less attractive, things that are kind of proxies. So for example, resource proxies. There's quite a bit of evolutionary psychology literature, which I find very interesting, like behavioral economics literature that shows, for example, there was a study that I was reading a few weeks ago about, so you have a guy or a gal, right? So you have a man or a woman, you put them in a car, right? And there's different kinds of cars. There are cars that are lower status cars, like a beaten up Toyota Corolla, and cars that are, higher status, like, brand new top of the line Porsche, let's say, right? And yeah, that's the stereotype, no doubt. You know, the guy in the nice car, the guy in not such a nice car, right? So what they did was that they had kind of men and women line up, and they showed them either a man or a woman in a not nice car or a nicer car. So here's the interesting thing, right? Let's say it's the guy in the car, okay? And let's say that the car is not very nice. Women will think that he's less attractive. Okay. Now you put him into a nice car, not only do women think he's more attractive overall, but even specific things that are proxies for attractiveness like taller height, women will exaggerate their perceived height. And they will say, oh no, he's, several inches taller than, he actually is. Men, interestingly, because of intragender competition, sexual competition, they will denigrate the guy's height, almost to be able to say, oh, he's not so great. Right? To be able to push the other guy down, to be able to make their own place in the dominance hierarchy higher. So they'll push the other person down basically through saying that or through perceiving that. It's a very, guy on guy competition sort of a thing or whatever for the same woman. So that's the idea there. Interestingly, though, if you take a woman and you put her into the two cars, right, there's kind of a negligible effect in terms of her perceived attractiveness. And we see this kind of overall, we see it in different ways. This is why, you can get a whole bunch of guys together or whatever, going out for beers, and you could say, oh, she has this, whatever you would think to be a low status job, right? Or a job that wouldn't make any money, let's say, or much money at all, and just say, well, that's her job, but she's, the most gorgeous woman alive. And guys will congratulate me, oh my gosh, this is such a big deal. You will never, I've never in my life heard of or seen a situation, and I've asked my friends and my colleagues about this, nobody's seen it either, right? Of just a group of women together essentially saying, listen, the guy has no money, he lives with his parents, he's got nothing to his name, but he's so handsome, perfect long-term partner. That's not a thing. Right? There are these differences and they're primal attraction triggers, right? It's not a choice. It's not society. It's not, this tyrannical patriarchy or anything like this, right? These just primal evolved, and if you don't believe in biological evolution, then socially evolved, kind of mechanisms or whatever that have kind of evolved kind of through, over the years. And when I say social evolution, no, I don't mean something like, oh, men have made or subjugated women or something like this, which seems to be this big cultural narrative these days. Yeah, that men have kept women down for generations, and so the current generation of men should kind of pay for this in some regard, which is just nonsense. I've been a dating coach for a hot second now, and the number of guys who come to me with these horror stories of things like trying to pay the bill and just getting reamed out, or trying to hold the door open and being called a misogynist, it's just ridiculous. Right? So I'm not talking about these things being socially evolved in that way. Now, for me personally, I wholeheartedly believe in biological evolution, and I do not believe that there's any reason why you can't have, the Christian faith and an evolutionary perspective simultaneously. I do not understand that argument. I think it's nonsense. Just my views, but also, come on, right? If you read enough literature on these sorts of things, unless you want to completely deny science, and in my opinion, science is a gift from God, right? And things like, modern medicine and modern surgical techniques and all these things are gifts from God. They're not man-made things that are in spite of God or anything like this. Anyway, getting off track. So the idea here, though, right, is that in terms of men perceiving women to be attractive, men definitely, there's no doubt, and one of the key reasons why is just being more testosteronergic, just having, more serum testosterone levels, but it also being more influential because of that on men. What happens is that, it's something where, the physical attractiveness piece is very, very important. And of course, personality, etc. is important. But remember, when it comes to attraction relative to dating and relationships, we're just trying to flip the switches as quickly as we can, right? So for men, right, the most important thing is going to be the initial physical attraction, right? Now, for women, physical attractiveness in terms of whether or not they perceive the man to be physically attractive is also immensely important. So women make it's called morphological determination, right? Within about 13 milliseconds is the number, right? Just of looking at you guys, right? So they look at you and they're looking for all kinds of things. And it's mostly proxies for high testosterone levels, right? So these are things like, kind of a pronounced brow, chiseled jawline, the ratio in terms of, from your nose to your chin, so kind of chin length is a great proxy for testosterone levels. These are things that they can very rapidly look at. They're not going to be like, hey, can I take your blood and check your testosterone levels? And if that happens to you, don't date that person, right? Get out of there. But the idea is pretty simple, right? That they're trying to use these proxies to be able to estimate your serum testosterone level without you kind of even knowing. And they don't know that they're doing it either. And there's no problem with that, right? This is just as nature made us. It is what it is, right? So women are judging us as well. There's no doubt about that. And women tend to be a lot more judgmental than men because they should. Because at the end of the day, the cost of gestation, of carrying the child, is way heavier for women than it is for men. And, a guy could go out today or whatever and get 3 people pregnant, doesn't have to carry any of the babies, doesn't make really any bodily sacrifices or anything like this, right? Doesn't have any kinds of, fluctuations in terms of hormones. The guy doesn't have to deal with any of that. So of course it makes more sense that women are going to be pickier than men are in a number of different regards. We see this even in online dating statistics, where you see that 80% of men are judged by women to be below average attractiveness. Right? Versus for men or whatever, it's much more of a normal distribution or whatever around the norm. So if we're going to rate it up from let's say a 1 to 10 scale, the average would be around 5, and it's like this, right? Versus for women, it's kind of very heavily skewed towards the not so attractive. Unfortunately, what that means is that, the preponderance of women are competing for the top 20% of men online. And what we see in gender ratio disparity studies is virtually always that if you have a case where there's more women than there are men, then the men are more likely to cheat, less likely to commit, less likely to marry you, etc. Right? And for women, it ends up being something where, in terms of behavior that's engaged in, let's say that it's like sex too soon or any of these sorts of things, it's engaged in, far more quickly, right? Because of this desire to kind of stand out to the guy, right? To this subset of men. And it's not good for either party in terms of the likelihood of long-term relational success, okay? But this is what we see, so it's even reflected in online dating. So again, I know I keep coming back to it, right? So the first of the 4 points is that women have less need to display good genes in terms of personality traits, etc., right? That's the second point, though, is that of course women display amazing personality traits, but it's interesting because think about something like creativity. So men display creativity immediately. It's almost like they have to. Women often say, I want the guy to make me laugh. You never have a guy be like, I want a woman who makes me laugh. Men say, I want a woman with a good sense of humor, which is basically a lie. What we're saying is that I want a woman who laughs at my jokes. That's what we're saying. We're not saying I want somebody who makes me laugh, right? I want you to find me funny. I want you to respond to my creativity, right? That's the idea here, right? So in other words, I want somebody who's attracted to me. Right? And that's the idea. And intelligence is a proxy for other things humor is a proxy for other things like intelligence, etc. Right? So men display creativity immediately because they have to demonstrate higher value. Yes, women are judging us on these morphological characteristics, but they also want to get a sense of, things like confidence. Confidence is a proxy for resources. It's a confidence for, your ability to effectively fight. It's a proxy for all kinds of things. This is why confidence is very important, right? So women, though, they do display creativity, of course, but interestingly, when you look at the data, what the literature says is that women have a habit of displaying creativity only in the context of long-term relationships, right? Not even a short-term hookup relationship or anything like this. In terms of a long-term committed relationships, this is when you really see women display a lot of creativity to their partner. Relative to the guys, kind of right off the bat. That's what you kind of end up seeing. And women respond. Women find it attractive, You make the girl laugh and these things, it's a good thing, okay? Same thing, any kind of proxy for status or power also perceived very attractive, right? So let's say you're a professor and you're speaking and, you're a keynote speaker, in front of a crowd. It's almost like, you're a rock star. It's the same general idea, right? You're, one of the classic attraction triggers is leader of men. That's the trigger, right? So basically you got a guy. So gentlemen, if you want to pick, we'll do a whole other series or whatever on photos to use for online dating based on what the literature says. Because there's over 2 billion swipes a day on Tinder alone of all the swipe-based apps. You should learn as much as you can based on the big data, right? So one of the things is you'll have other high-status guys around. You want to make sure that everybody doesn't look more attractive than you. This is something that happens all the time or whatever, where let's say it's you and a friend in your primary photo, and your friend is just, it's one of these things. They're just much more classically attractive than you are, right? It doesn't mean that you're not attractive. That's not what I'm saying, right? But when you place yourself next to someone else like that, oh my, what are you doing, right? People are going to assume, if they're swiping on you, they're going to assume that you're the other person. I'm just telling you right now, that is how it is. So it's one of these things, make sure that your primary photo is only you, not you with a group of people. But if somebody sees the first photo, they say, hey, I'm interested. You keep going through and you're a guy, right? If you have a photo of you and a bunch of other high, perceivably high status guys, and let's say you're in the middle or they're listening to you while you're talking, oh, wow, right? Trigger, trigger, trigger. That's what I'm talking about. That's a great attraction trigger to hit, okay, in your photos. So the third thing to be able to mention is that men do, because of testosterone levels, that's why, it's not because we're pigs, men respond more to sexual and aesthetic cues, right? And it's because of higher testosterone levels, all right? So during, monthly ovulatory cycle, when women have more testosterone in their system, women also respond more to sexual and aesthetic cues. All right. And so, but men, testosterone levels are higher all the time. So in the aggregate, in general, we respond more to sexual and aesthetic cues. Okay. And because that's something visual, the concept of a muse all day long, right? Of a female muse for us is going to be something where, very physically beautiful and these things. It's that, I really hate the phrase, the divine feminine, but it just because I view it as too overly spiritually or whatever, right? Not saying anything about women whatsoever. They're wonderful, right? But I'm just saying I don't like that term in terms of divine feminine, right? So what happens is that in terms of this concept of a muse, right? Because of that or whatever, there's no real need for a male muse who's just incredibly gorgeous. That could be, basically it would just be a short-term mating strategy. I have a friend who's obsessed with Idris Elba, who is a very classically attractive man. There's no doubt about it. There's a lot of these guys where it's if you look at an attractive guy and just be even though you may not be sexually attracted, right, to other men, you're still just I get it. I get why my girlfriend thinks that, Johnny Depp is an attractive guy. Sure, why not, right? So I completely understand it. Am I attracted? No, right? But it doesn't mean that, she doesn't have to have the right to be attracted to another guy, right? It doesn't mean that somebody's going to do something, right? So at the end of the day, it makes sense that those guys, though, it's more of a short-term attraction and mating style thing than it is kind of like a muse who inspires you to be artistic and be creative, right? Because again, men are more likely to display creativity immediately. And so because of that, it makes sense again to be able to have that female muse, all right? And then finally, if you do look at the art world, what you find is that it's a very kind of famous stat that most artists produce either their most famous, most prolific, whatever works between the ages of their 20s and their 30s. And these are the levels in men, at least, right, where testosterone levels are highest, right? And I found this incredibly interesting. The testosterone levels are highest, and also, their art or whatever is just gigantic. And when you ever end up looking at a lot of artists or whatever in their diaries and these things, they'll talk about their muse or their muses, right? There's just innumerable examples here. And of course, they can marry their muse and these sorts of things. It could literally be a goddess or something like this, kind of an anthropomorphic version of something like love, like Aphrodite, etc. But whatever it happens to be, right, again, it is always a female muse. But again, it makes sense in terms of serum testosterone levels being at their highest, especially in their 20s, but then also in their 30s, right? Before it starts to take a dive, and then it reduces over time. So in the aggregate, this is what the literature suggests about why there are male muses. Alrighty, everybody, thank you so much for joining me today. As always, if you were interested in one-on-one or group-based date coaching, it would be a pleasure to help you out. As I have for many dozens of men here over the last few years. It's been just amazing. Please do feel free to get in touch with me via the website below, either to be able to schedule a session with me or to be able to invite me to come and speak at your place of worship. It would be a real pleasure to be able to do that with you, to be able to speak to either singles or couples or a mix of both. Please do let me know how I can be most of service to you. Signing off, everyone. Don't forget to get out there, take chances, and be your best self. God bless you, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you enjoyed that episode and you'd like to see more original content, then please do click on one of the links right here. I hope to see you in the next one.